So, as we said going on earlier, we saw man, the fall, we saw that relationships, when they are broken, the consequences that they can have, and how it affects every other aspect of our lives, right? We gotta realize that sometimes some of the reasons why folks turn to drugs and alcohol is in search of trying to find something that is missing in their life, right? As we look at being created in the image of God, we see that we have the control, potential, relationship, knowledge, personality, and value. If we start seeing that we are created with value, then we don't look for something to add value to us, right? Every aspect of our lives, everything that we receive, then becomes a tool or an instrument to be used for the glory or for the glorification of God, right? Now, listen what I just said. Everything that we receive, because one of the things that we have to get out of in our mindset is that people are not there to be used. People are there to share a relationship with. In the culture that we live in, many times individuals, they see how I can use someone to get ahead, right? If we're going to go back to God's ideal, we got to remember that every single individual you see is created in the image of God. They have something that God has given you, right? So they have that control, potential, relationship, knowledge, personality, and value. They may have a different function or role that they are playing in life, but they are no less than you. They may have less money than you. You may have less money than them, but that doesn't take away your value. Because again, when we see that this is only messed up because of sin, then we can start thinking a little differently and say, well, without the sin in the picture, then this person has all these things, right? Now, if we're going to be God's people, if we're going to have this image of God in us, then we got to start seeing people the same way. So as I go down the street and I see the homeless, guess what I'm seeing? I'm not just seeing somebody who is down on their luck. I'm seeing somebody who is made in the image of God, and God has given me an opportunity now to reach out and minister and show that characteristic in me that is in God, right? Or that God has that is in me, rather. Okay, so I go down the road and I see someone who is addicted to drugs. Then guess what happened? Now I start seeing another drug addict. I see someone who has that potential, right? Someone who has that value and may need me to help them to get out from that sinful control that they can get back to where they need to be. So one of the things that we're going to realize as we talk about the image of God and our fallen state, we're going to realize as individuals that we have fallen. And now that we have fallen, right, and we realize that where we are, we need to return in connection to God. We need to get back to be in connection with God. In other words, where we are now restoring that fallen image back to where it needs to be, right? That's what Colossians talk about, right? If you go to Colossians chapter 3, Colossians 3. And look at from about verse number 8. Who's over there? And by the way, I'm going to get you all to do a lot of reading for me, right? You realize that one of the things that I didn't have on the board is that when you're made in the image of God, you're a good reader. Alright, so I just find somebody to do it for me.
You ready?
Yes, when you are.
But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice.
Now, if you're to label verse 8 under the fallen nature, he is saying what you are when you are fallen. When you're fallen, you have all that anger, you have that rage, you have that malice, everything that destroys relationships, isn't it? Right? So in verse number 8, he says you got to rid yourself of it. All anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Wow. Can you imagine if we deal with individuals who, when something doesn't go the way that they want to go, yes, they may get upset, but they don't hold it against you for the rest of their life. Or individuals who just don't curse you out and tell you everything under the sun. Right? I don't know about you, but I remember I used to use some of those words too. All right, no, don't reminisce. It's not good. Don't reminisce over it. Okay, but he's saying that you need to get rid of all these things. Then he says that there's something else that's gonna have to be taken away from our lives if we're gonna get better. He says, verse number 9, what? Do not lie one to another. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off the old self with its practice. Somebody read verse 9 for me.
Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices.
So verse 9 is where we are here. He said that you have taken off your old self with the practices. Go on.
And have put on the new self, which is being, renewed.
So look what he says, right? You have put on this new self. You have put on this new self, which is being what? Renewed. It's a process, right? It's a process. It's being renewed. How is it being renewed? And what is it being renewed into? Go on.
In knowledge.
It's renewed in what? In knowledge. One of the things that we saw when we are made in the image of God is that we have what? Knowledge, right? Now it's being renewed in the knowledge of, go on.
In the image of its creator.
The knowledge and the image of its creator. Going back to where we were. Now before we know God, we are living in the fallen state, right? Now that we come into that relationship with God, that is being renewed. So every single day of our lives, guess what? We're getting a little closer back to where we were originally created to be, right? In relationship. That's the reason why if you know God, our relationship with each other should be a little better, should be a little different. Now remember, there is always some residue in us from the old man, right? So when that residue shows up, we got to remember I'm being renewed. So the residue shows up, then guess what? Do whatever it takes to amend or mend that relationship. Because going from the old or the fallen to the new, I know I had some different color markers.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Going from the fallen to renewed, smack dead between there is choice. I hope that showed up. Right? Choice. We got to be willing to make some choices. The choices that we make is what's going to reflect whether or not we have this renewed image of God that is in us. Right? Question, thoughts before we move on. Question, thoughts. What do you think, Central? Any questions? No. Okay. What about you, Sherman?
All right, so we got the image of God. We're renewing our connection.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side of this, we're being made in the image of God. Is there a such animal as someone taking on the image of the devil?
Yes. As a matter of fact, every single individual after the fall takes on the characteristics of Satan. That's why we are called fallen creatures. As a matter of fact, if you think about Ephesians chapter 2, it tells us in verse 2 that we once walked according to the prince of the power of this air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience, right? Jesus Christ told the Jews this way in John chapter 8 and verse 44. He says, you are of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father is what you will do. He was a liar from the beginning, and when he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own authority. So there's actually two types of individuals in this world. There are those who are fallen and still living in a fallen condition, and they take on the characteristics and do the things and desires of the devil. And then there are those who have been renewed, still living in flesh, but taking on more and more the characteristics of God. Now, just like the children of God will make mistakes, will sin and fall short, the children who are following the ways of the devil do good things sometimes. And sometimes that's why it becomes so difficult to distinguish. What's going to make the difference is that connection, right? The person who has fallen has a connection and has been renewed, has a connection with God that is renewing this image. The person who has fallen and has not been renewed has a connection with a spirit that works in the children of disobedience. Great question. All right. Any other questions?
So being made in the image of God also means that we have the ability to make choices, right or wrong. Right.
Right, and that's why I went to the word potential.
So it brings me back to when God placed Adam and Eve in the garden, and she ate from the tree that was in the middle. That was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. and God said, Satan, the devil told her that she would know everything and become like God. So which means that within her already was this potential to know good and evil.
Right.
But was the eating of the fruit was like the key to open that knowledge?
I would say it is in the sense of the choice. Let me illustrate, because I heard a lot of theories on what that fruit is, and then we're going to wrap up for tonight. Think about this way. Let's just pretend for 1 minute that the fruit was an orange, right? The very choice of choosing to eat this is what actually gave that individual that knowledge of good and evil. Because before partaking of it, all they knew was obedience to God. Right? The minute they partook of it, now they know what disobedience is. So it's not to be just thought about, okay, it has to be something mystical. The minute you made that choice to do differently, immediately you now get to know what it means to be evil and also what it means to be good.
But in a sense, that knowledge of good and evil was already placed within them.
No, the potential to. The potential to know it. The only time it becomes known, it was when it was acted upon. Right? So the potential is there, the action brings across that knowing of. Because before, all they knew was obedience to God. The potential to disobey was there because the fruit of the tree was in the middle of the garden. When they partook of the fruit, it's no longer a potential, it's now a reality. Right? That's where the difference comes in. Right?
So it's like this. Like if you never tasted an apple, you wouldn't know how an apple tasted.
Right.
You know, you had the potential to know because it's there for you to bite it.
Right.
So once you actually bite it, now you know whether you like it or not because you know what an apple tastes like.
Right. And the only thing is that when they bit of that fruit, there was no going back. Yeah. Because like with us, we buy that apple, and that's what that analogy kept down. We could decide, I'll never eat this apple again. However, there are some doors, once you unlock them, guess what? You're going to have a problem with it for the rest of your life. Yeah. That's the reason why some folks, they try drugs and that's the end of it for the rest of their life. They're going to have a struggle until they die. But I appreciate y'all. Look forward to next week. Remember, I want you to go ahead and read some scriptures. So we want to read Colossians 3 a little bit more. Right? That's going to be really important in our study. Continue to read Genesis chapter 1. I want you to read next week Genesis chapter 6. Okay? From verse number 5. This is where we're going to see the corruption of man starting to spread even a little bit more. Right? So Genesis 1, we're going to read that again, verse 26. Hit chapter 2, as we talk about in verse number 7. We're going to look at a woman coming into being as well. But in chapter 6, that's where we saw man taking on sin to a whole new level. Right? Let me say this. One of the things that we're going to learn as we see the value that we have in the sight of God, we're also going to realize that with every sinful choice, right? With every sinful choice, it doesn't take away our value, it just hinders our relationship. Okay, so your value is not changed by your sin condition, right? But it does hinder your relationship. In other words, you are still 100% human, created in the image of God, even when you sin, right? However, that sin condition hinders your relationship between you and God and between you and your fellow men. And I can tell you that from experience. All right? Appreciate it and enjoy the rest of the evening.